Welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today is a special reflection episode, and these are going to come from insights from the episodes that most captured your attention, the ideas and the insights that were in those episodes. And so, as our final episode of season 3, we want to reflect on some of these learnings. In addition to that, just a couple things from the Building Thinkers podcast as a whole. Since our podcast is on Spotify, we get that wrapped view that many of y'all are used to seeing. One interesting statistic from that is that our audience has grown by 716% and 23% for our followers. So we're really excited about the growth that you all are resonating with the messages that we're sharing, and we're excited about that. Let's dig into the first episode that really stuck with you all was the art of daycrafting. This was our episode with Bruce Stanley. He talked a lot about how we can intentionally design our days in service of a good life. And so as someone who is pretty obsessed with human flourishing and not only the productivity side of things, but how can we just spend our days in ways that are meaningful? And as we think about the reflections from this year and the growth within the Building Thinkers company, the projects that we're a part of, I find myself continuing to work in this area to pause and to consider and reflect on where my energy is going, where my time is going, what is bringing me joy, what's bringing me meaning, where can I make the most impact? And so in this episode, we'll share a clip where Bruce talks about this idea of autonomy. And so we'll play that clip for you here.
Autonomy, I think this is leading people into a lot of problems. The problem is your autonomous day is being designed for you by this part of the brain that I talked about that isn't actually very good at designing our days. I've been freelance for most of my career, and I am the worst boss I could ever work for. My own autonomy means that I work too long, that I give myself a hard time, that I feel guilty for taking breaks, all of those kind of things. So we're in a place where we actually need to bring back some shape, some discipline, some harder edges to what we do.
This really resonates with me, and I shared it on the episode too, but this has been a sticking point for me, in particular as an entrepreneur where I can make my own schedule. I can also be really hard on myself as my own boss. And I think that conversation around recognizing that we come with, he explains this idea of inherited rules. And so I think this lesson about autonomy, and especially for my entrepreneurs out there, or whatever part of your day that you get to craft yourself, even that language of it being a craft really signals that we have the autonomy, wherever that is. Maybe it's just in one part of your day, or maybe it's your entire day, to make these decisions, to reflect on what's going on, where our time and energy is going. What are the inherited rules, kind of these maybe not explicit, but implicit operating procedures we have? Like, I have to I have to work until X time because that's the routine I've been in. And what would happen if we adopted a posture of experimentation and tried something new? And Bruce talks about just for one day, see if, maybe a work block that's earlier in the morning, or maybe a run that is in the middle of the day brings new energy. So this is where I've seen it in my own life this year. I've been working out with a personal trainer for about 7 months now, and seeing the energy that's brought, not only happy with strength and muscle mass growth and things like that, but the energy that I see in the afternoons. So I think this idea of crafting our day, and I encourage you all, as you're thinking about end of year reflections, to consider, if you haven't listened to this episode, listen to the Bruce Stanley episode. And along with that episode, there's a blueprint for thought. And the blueprint for thought, these are thinking protocols, journaling activities. It depends on what the episode was, what we decide to create in the blueprint for thought. But we will link the blueprint for thought for this episode with Bruce Stanley, and along with the others that we'll talk about, in the episode description. So you'll be able to get that. The second episode that really stood out to you all was how to land a book deal. This was my conversation with Megan Stevenson, and I loved this episode. Okay, and when I went back to it, I found a really funny connection because I'm going to play the clip for you where she talks about some of the indicators around who should write a book, what things stand out to her. And so let's take a listen to that clip.
It's about figuring out what you want to monetize and what you don't want to monetize. And then in terms of, focus, the best entrepreneurs we have are really focused. And that focus can be broad. I almost think of that as like this is going to sound country, but that's okay, a horse corral. But you are going to stay in this little zone and you're going to stay in this little area, this little playpen. And that is like what you're going to talk about ad nauseum. And I think where creators go wrong is they think, hey, I've already said this message, everyone's heard it, but people need to hear that over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? Shoot out a bunch of content and then doubling down on that, repurposing that, and just, creating frameworks and IP and all of that. And that's usually where a book stems from. It isn't like, I have this idea, now you, the magic ghostwriter person, is going to help me like figure it out. It's more of like, hey, I have these frameworks, I have these ideas, like, what do you think is worthy here, right? Well, what do you think will sell here? And then we can work with that.
Okay, did you all notice, if you were watching on Spotify, what was a little bit ironic about this clip? So I had my horse dress on and we ended up talking about the horse corral. And so when Megan was talking about this idea that the best entrepreneurs, they are focused. What I loved that she added to that was like, focus can be broad, but it still needs a corral. So this was the idea of the horse corral. I've been really thinking about this because one of, this happens within podcast and any content. I love being a multi-potentialite. So I don't like the idea that I'm only going to talk about one thing or only be interested in one area because, this is just one little small section of my books. There's another giant bookshelf on the other side of this wall because I love reading and learning and exploring and new things. And so I love this idea that the best entrepreneurs are really focused, but that focus can be in this form of the corral where you are talking about different things, but there's a through line, there's a fence around them. And I think that in our Building Thinkers content, our corral is the idea of a flourishing life, the idea of activating human potential. And the reality is that that allows us to be in many different domains of life design. And so our life includes multidimensionality and helping people reflect on those ideas in the different domains of life is something that really lights me up. Okay, so if you are interested, if on your 2026 vision board is writing a book, I really encourage you to listen to How to Land a Book Deal with Megan Stevenson. We'll, of course, drop that link in the episode description. And then if you want more on that, you can also download the Blueprint for Thought. It's called, Is This a Book Idea? How to Corral Your Creative Genius and Avoid Backing the Wrong Horse. And so we build on that fun corral metaphor, and you can grab that also in the episode description. Okay, the final episode that really captured your attention was Simple Shifts That Level Up Your Podcast Game. This was my conversation with my amazing podcast manager, Alexis. And I want to share one of the clips from that episode where she's talking about her advice to folks that are interested in getting started with a podcast.
I always ask what the goal is for the podcast. Is it something that you are trying to attract new listeners? I get some people who are like wanting this to turn into a money-making machine. And while yes, that is very possible, it is not realistic for most people starting out. And so I like to ask, what do you see the podcast doing in the bigger picture? We kind of break it down from there. I think it's important to recognize that this is a long game. And I think a lot of people really expect downloads to go crazy, within the first month, 6 months or whatever. And it's just not the case. This platform podcasting is a long game, and you just need to focus more so on consistent. And then once you've built consistency, then you can start putting your focus onto new aspects of that podcast. if that makes sense, because
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people don't think about the consistency part.
Yeah.
And that needs to be a habit first before you start, okay, let's see, how can we grow this? How can we make sure that we're attracting the right audience?
A couple other things that stood out to me about this episode with Alexis, we talked about perfectionism and we talked about learning how to be okay when things are not perfect. This is perfect for me in this moment as I'm recording this episode on the day that it's due and in between a bunch of other meetings. But I want to capture these ideas and these insights and leave you all with something to reflect on at the end of the year. So I know it won't be perfect, and I'm okay with that because it's more important for me to get it into your hands and to model what I'm working on myself, which is continuing to ship and continuing to create, because it really helps me to think. And that's this next clip that I wanted to share that came from this episode with Alexis. Our experiences and what we bring to the table is different than anybody else. And so it's a disservice to the clients that I serve, the audience that I have, to like hold it in and not publish and create. So for me, that the podcast is, again, the disciplined place where even if I don't post anything else on LinkedIn or whatever, and I have these partially written notes in my notebook, I will publish a podcast and I will publish a blueprint for thought that goes with that. And hopefully that cycle of creativity helps me continue to like improve my own thinking. One other thing that strikes me as I think about what might have stood out to you all in these episodes is the idea of shipping something, the idea of creating something. And I want to encourage you that it's not too late to give it a go. Maybe this is something that at this point in the year you're considering for the new year, or maybe you have some downtime right now to give something a go. Wherever you are, you're not too late. And I encourage you to settle into the idea that what our world really needs now is humans, humans who are attuned and reflective and willing to slow down and consider what work they may need to do in their own life, or what work is theirs to do out in their community or in their organization. And then to continue to refine, not for some sort of toxic productivity to keep going and keep doing, but almost the opposite. And by that, I mean to settle in, to be where their feet are. Let's this season be where our feet are and consider what tiny experiments we can run in our own lives, how we can craft days that are full of meaning to us. And if part of that is going after a goal you've been considering, writing a book, starting a podcast, creating a Substack, there's nothing too big or small, but your voice is needed in the world. So if you enjoyed this episode, we would love if you'd leave us a 5-star rating and review. Any of those comments, we read through those, and it really helps more people discover this podcast. We look forward to hearing from you, and excited about our 2026 upcoming season that will drop before you know it.